welcome to Dr. Bushra Ilyas. She is a medical writer at 6 Degrees Medical in Toronto. Before that, she did her PhD here in the Department of Biochemistry with Dr. Brian Coombs. And now she's going to tell us a little bit about her career path and what it is to be a science writer and medical writer.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. It's great to be here, and thank you for the invite. I see some familiar names in the audience, which is awesome. So hello if I know you, and hello if I don't know you. It's I'm really excited to be here because it wasn't that long ago that I was sitting exactly where you guys are now and wondering, what do I do with my life? This PhD thing was cool, but now what? So I'm here to just tell you about my trajectory and my career path, and maybe spark some interest, hopefully spark some interest in what I do. So like my title says, I want to share with you what I do, how I got here, and why I think this is a rewarding career path. Like Leslie said, please feel free to interrupt me throughout with questions. I don't have a lot of slides because I want to keep this short and informative. So hopefully we have time for a great dialogue. So before we get started, I just wanted to do a quick little poll and see if where we're all at. So if you could scan the QR code and respond on your phones and let me know if you'd heard about medical communications or medical writing before, and if you had, do you actually know what it is? So it's not just a yes no, but maybe you've heard the words but you don't actually know what's involved. I like the 50-50 split. Perfect. I mean, I can tell you from my personal experience, when I was in grad school, I didn't really know what it was. Or maybe, I'd heard of it, but I thought it was like, yeah, those people that write science blogs or articles on websites, right? It seems like a lot of you are way more knowledgeable than I am when I was in grad school, so that's awesome. But and it's great to know that at least you've heard of it in some way, shape, or form. So I want to start with so thank you for responding to the poll. I want to start with just taking a step back and talking about medical writing as a whole, because yes, it is sometimes those people that write on blogs and on journal websites, but it's a lot more than that. So so it turns out there's a whole industry out there around this. So medical writing is formally defined as the development and production of materials that deal with medicine or healthcare. So that doesn't really tell you much of anything. It can take many forms though. So you can be a medical writer in a medical communications agency, which is what I do. You can work for a clinical research organization or a CRO. You can work directly with a pharma company, or you can work with other organizations, which is honestly where I had heard of it the most. Like if you're writing for a journal or public relations or a nonprofit or the government. So it can take a lot of forms. But today I'm really going to focus on medical communications agencies because that's my personal experience. And what these are agencies that partner with pharmaceutical companies or work for pharmaceutical companies to create content, essentially. Again, within that subset, it can take many forms. We're not going to go into all of it because it's, kind of, you're just constantly funneling further. So we're not going to go that deep. But this is kind of like the official formal definition of what medical writing is. But I wanted to tell you what I think it is. So to me, medical writing is the process of simplifying content to emphasize key messages and objectives, adapting the information that you have to align with whatever the communication goals are, engaging an audience through innovative and interactive approaches, connecting data to improve retention and pull through of key messages, conceptualizing data to improve understanding, and visualizing information to address the learner preferences. So all of these things are, are things that are involved in the writing process that aren't actually necessarily writing. And the goal is really to generate meaningful and impactful healthcare materials for education or marketing purposes. So from my personal experience, I mostly work in the medical education space. So I won't be talking about marketing communications as much. Um, but as you know, the slide shows, it's more than just taking information that and writing it out. It's kind of a conversion of information, and I think that's probably one of the things that I find super rewarding about this job. It's kind of using the skills we have, all of you have, because you all have the same training I did coming into this, and putting that to practice to kind of communicate effectively for whatever the goal is. So those are a lot of words. And they can mean, it's hard to, they're pretty intangible. It's hard to get a sense of what this can really look like from all of that. So what does a day in the life of a medical writer really look like? So last week I was on vacation. I wanted to pull this example from last week, but I was on vacation, so you would have just seen a bunch of pictures of me in France. So we're gonna go back a couple of weeks. So a few weeks ago, I spent a couple of hours working on a conference symposium. So our clients, they're attending a big diabetes conference, and they have an industry sponsored session. So I was working with two doctors to develop their presentation content, something that a lot of you are familiar with if you've ever been to a conference, but then also work on everything around that symposium. So they've got to advertise their conference, and they've got to promote it on social media. So developing all of this, the scientific content, and the call to actions for everything around this conference symposium. So that was a couple of hours of my week. We also, for a different client, had to work on an advisory board. This is where you bring a bunch of experts together to get their input on kind of your pharma strategy. So we brought together. So I was working on the content and the agenda for this meeting, but also had to put together a report based on what the advisors said after the meeting. So that was a big chunk of time because those reports can take a while. Anyone that's written a committee report can relate. Then we, another one of our clients wanted to create a synopsis of new articles that had come out in the field. So I spent a bit of time, kind of reading these articles, finding what I felt was important about them, writing it, and then eventually we converted it to an interactive PDF that you can like toggle through and share, and easily find the article you're looking for and learn more about it. So that was kind of fun. That was a fun project. A lot of reading. There's a lot of reading. And then I wanted to take a break from the deep sciencey stuff. So I had a small little project to develop a podcast script. So for this one, there were some new advances in the field, and it was really important that like everyone working in the company knew about them. So we put together a little podcast episode, two people interviewing each other. So I developed the script for that, which required a bit of reading, I guess, to figure out, okay, what do we really want to say here, and then simplify it and break it down into an interactive back and forth between the two speakers, and then it gets recorded after the fact. After that, I had to switch gears again and think about education for a little bit. So one of our clients, they are new to a disease area, and so there's a lot of new people that don't know anything about the disease, and so they really needed to develop some training assets. So videos, podcasts, slide decks to help bring people up to speed on this disease area. it's really hard to do that without clear learning objectives and a plan in mind. So I spent a few hours putting together essentially a curriculum. Um, I know some of you probably TA or work with the great profs here there at Mac to think about education and curricula. So this will be familiar to you. You know, you really need to have clear learning objectives in mind and a good flow of information to pull that red thread. So that was a lot. You know, it's not just okay. Here's five things, and we'll just list them together. But it required thinking more broadly about okay, where is the learner now? Where do they need to be? What are the objectives? And then putting together education based on that. After that, I wanted to get creative again. So, you know, the good thing about this job is it lets you bounce back and forth a little bit. So I spent a bit of time working on a digital newsletter. So we wanted to share updates from our clients on what they've been up to. So we crafted the messaging for the newsletter, made it look really nice, and then the client sent it out over an email to make themselves look good, which is always fun. Then I had to think about a scientific narrative. So we've got a new drug that might be coming out onto the market. But to prepare the market for the drug, we need to think about, how to communicate what the unmet need is, what the disease burden is, and what the benefits or potential benefits of this drug are. So I was working on kind of an outline to build that story essentially, and from there, eventually, we will kind of flesh this out into a deck that can be used. That can be used for videos, for social media, for educational events, and the uses will be endless. But this outline is kind of going to be the foundational document that will kind of allow that branching out. After that, we have another client that needs to start having conversations with doctors to talk to them about the disease area and the latest trial results of a drug that they are developing. So I spent some time just pulling together trial results, building it into a communications deck that they can use in their one-on-one or small group conversations. And then to cap my week off, I had to work on a video storyboard. So our clients wanted a video to tease a new event that they're organizing. So I had to kind of like draft, okay, what is the video going to be? Where's the call to action? What are the visual elements we're going to pull into the video? And then we have an in-house graphics design team, and then they took it from there and created the storyboard. So that was all 1 week. Every week looks a little bit different, but essentially, hopefully that gives you a bit of a taste of all of the things you can be doing, or I can be doing, I guess, as a writer. The cool thing about this is the work spans the breadth and depth of pharma. So all of those different projects, they were for 10 different client departments. So 10 different departments within pharma companies. I was working on 4 different therapeutic products, so 4 different drugs, for lack of a better word. I was working in 3 different disease areas. So some of that work was for obesity, some of it was for diabetes, some of it was for liver disease. The work I do, it's for clients that are based in Europe, which means some early morning calls. Some of them are based in the US. Some of them were also based in Canada, just down the road in Mississauga. And the products the products that we're working on, some of them were in phase 1 or phase 2, so really early in development, and some of them they're already on the market and launched, and we're thinking about communication for them. So it really, throughout my week, not only do I have a diversity of types of deliverables or offerings that I'm working on, but also spanning, um, all aspects of pharma, essentially. Um, okay, so I told you the what, and hopefully that didn't scare you off. You're still here, so that's good. Um, but now I want to take a step back and tell you a bit of the how. So, how did I get here? Like Leslie mentioned, I did my PhD at McMaster with Brian Coombs in the Department of Biochemistry. I started that in 2013. I came into my PhD straight out of undergrad because I was like, yes, research. I know I want this. That didn't last too long. Don't get me wrong. I loved my PhD. But there were some things I didn't love about it. So gradually, 3.5 years in, I started to ask myself, okay, we gotta diversify skill sets here. So I started doing some freelance editing. This was editing for journal manuscripts, and then I also actually started getting more involved internally at McMaster. So the Department of Biochemistry, for those that don't know, is part of the IIDR. So I started getting more involved in IIDR communications, and there was a bit of an IIDR newsletter, if I remember correctly. So I tried to get my toes wet in what writing could look like in different formats. So not just writing an abstract or writing a grant, but thinking about this a little bit differently. So through my PhD, from then on, I was kind of dabbling a little bit with this editing and anything I could get my hands on for the department or for the IIDR. And then before I knew it, even though it felt long at the time, I defended and I was like, oh no, what now? I was chatting with Leslie before you joined. I hear a couple of weeks ago there was someone from the government that gave a talk about getting a government job. That was something I considered. I applied to anything and everything. I applied to pharma. I applied. I found teaching really rewarding, so I applied for teaching positions. I applied for government lab positions, even though I was pretty sure I didn't want to be in a lab anymore. It's fine. I was like, let's see what's out there. I have no idea where I want to go. I did get kind of lucky. I had a buddy who was in Laurie Burroughs' lab, who worked at 6 Degrees, and he was like, "Hey, you should try out this medical writing thing." And I was like, "What's that?" Um, quite literally. So, after hearing a bit more about what the job was from him, I was like, "Okay, cool. That kind of sounds like something I could do." So I applied for the job, and I got it, which was awesome. So then I made the transition, and boy, was it a transition. I went from, going to the lab, kind of doing the same experiment every day, hoping for different results, um, to and kind of this like having this long-term view where you're working on one or two things for like a couple of years maybe, to joining this like fast-paced agency environment where all of a sudden you're on 5 projects and think about all these different things. And then COVID hit, obviously, because it was 2020. So then we all went virtual. So it was a transition, but it was rewarding. And from there, I've been fortunate enough to grow in the role as well. So I started off as a medical writer. And then in 2021, I was promoted to a senior medical writer, and now I've been promoted to a principal. Don't ask me what that is. I could not tell you. I'm kidding. Um, so so that's kind of been my career trajectory so far. But that doesn't really tell you how I got here, or how you could get here. So when reflecting on this job and thinking about this talk, one thing that I think a lot of people say, but it's really hard to believe, is like, oh, you already do it, or you already have the skills. So I thought, I'd look back um at like what the job description was and what my resume kind of said. And And it's true, you do actually have the skills. So let's go through it. So all of you, by virtue of being in grad school or having been in grad school, have strong research skills and a willingness to learn quickly, and that's something that is prized in a medical writer. Um, you're forced to be an adaptable and independent thinker, and you have to be adaptable when you're working on 5 different deliverables in the span of the same day. So you've got that. Um, you're all able to produce high quality scientific materials because, let's be real, that's basically the standard to which grad students are held. So the kind of scientific landscape, and you're really good at producing those materials. And you have a keen eye for detail because it turns out, 0.5 grams of SDS here or there, and your page doesn't run. Wow, I remember those terms. Okay, good for me. It's been a while, guys. But you have a keen eye for detail because you have to, because your experiments kind of depend on it. You have the existing connections by virtue of being here at this talk. You're already setting yourself up by having awareness of the industry, something I didn't have when I was in grad school. So you're already ahead of the curve there. One thing I think that's a misconception about grad students is that you're you work independently, but I've certainly seen at McMaster, like the level of collaboration within a lab, between labs, between departments is huge. So I think we all have this team-oriented mindset that's really valuable. And it's important to recognize that at the end of the day, if you're working for an agency, you're working in a service role, you're working in a client-facing role. But there's a lot that you have skill wise that can cater to that as well. Um, we all have effective time management and ability to multitask. Anyone that has used all 4 timer options on your little lab desk timer can vouch for the fact that you have effective time management. And anyone that's run a PCR, a gel, a page, and a gel at the same time can multitask. And I think we all have a creative and innovative outlook. One thing grad school does really well is hit us with all of the roadblocks possible ever. And to overcome those, you're constantly thinking about what you can do differently, or thinking about a new creative way to work around a problem. So that kind of ability to work around a problem and show up with a solution is, that's amazing. So all of this to say is, you have the competencies, and all that you need to do is like highlight them and build on them. Like I mentioned, I've had the fortune of growing in my role here. So, I'm not, this talk isn't to say like, yeah, cool, you're instantly ready. Like there was a lot of learning and a lot of it comes on the job. But again, a willingness to learn is step 1, right? I've had the opportunity while being in the role to understand more about the industry and the business itself through by learning some business foundations. I did this kind of ad hoc by like getting more involved in internal initiatives, but also had the opportunity to kind of do a business foundations course. Man, that was confusing. I can barely do like personal accounting, so I was just like, I don't understand how to run a business. It was stressful. This role also gives you the opportunity to enhance or to further develop your leadership experience. So not only are you learning on the job, but soon you're training on the job as well. So there's a lot of training of junior writers and oversight. There's also a lot of mentorship opportunities and professional leadership development. So I actually had the opportunity to get a formal leadership course, which was eye-opening to say the least. Gradually, as you learn more about the industry and about the business, kind of become a salesperson, which let me tell you, when I thought about my 5-year plan, I did not think that sales and business development were things that were going to spark joy. Uh, but it's pretty fun. Getting involved in pitches, bringing in organic new business, identifying new sales leads, working on new offerings, all of that is kind of part of the job, and really diversifies like what you do on a day to day. And then eventually, strategic consulting, like you move from being just like a writer to more of a consultant and more of a partner to your clients, which is to me the most rewarding. So as you gain expertise in your therapeutic area, um, or in kind of like what your client is looking for, it kind of transitions to being a scientific strategist, which again, you have the skill set already because you think strategically all of the time for your projects, but it just takes it to the next level. Okay, so I've talked a lot about what I do and how I got here. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time, if I haven't said this already, talking about why I think medical communications is a rewarding career choice. So, like I said, I did really enjoy my grad school experiences. I've made friends for life. From grad school, and it was a blast, and I think it was what I needed at the time. I needed to get the research bug out of me, but there were some things that, when I think about what I do now, there are some things that make me realize that um, a lot of what I enjoyed most about grad school is what I have in my career right now. So um, so some things I didn't love about grad school were, you're kind of working on 1 or 2 projects a year, maybe a side project if your PI is cool with that. But it's long term, and there's a couple of things pulling in your focus. Um, if if my earlier slide wasn't clear, there's a lot in a medical communications agency. There's a lot on the go at the same time. So, and I personally find that rewarding. You may not, but I personally find it fun to be able to like shift gears, think about something else for a little bit of time, and then kind of have multiple things rolling in parallel. The other thing about grad school that I didn't super love is a lot of the time the outputs are intangible. The one PCR that you run isn't going to make or break a project. Usually it's 7,000 PCRs that you run to make or break a project. And it's not always super clear like what success looks like or what you need to say, yep, this is good. I got it. Like, I'm ready. A lot of that is murky and needs you to define it, which is awesome because it gives you independence. But at the same time, in my current job, I really love that all of the projects I have discrete goals. So, what success looks like for each of them is really well defined. And the end dates are well defined. So you're not really like, ooh, I may graduate in 23 or 2025. Kind of like, yep, this project ends in 6 months, and then you never have to think about it again. You file it away and it's on to the next thing. So that has been really fun. I should say there are some things I work on that I've been working on since I started, but that's also okay because sometimes you need that continuity. I talked about teamwork a little bit. Like I said, Mac is awesome for collaboration, but for the most part, especially if it's your own projects, you're largely independent, right? Like you are in charge of getting to the finish line. You can pull people along the way, but it's a pretty independent process, and your successes are yours, but your failures are also yours alone. A lot of medcoms agencies work in a team-based matrix model. So not only are you always working as a team, but you're also constantly working with different teams. So it's not like, cool, it's the same 5 people across all of my projects. It's, you've got different functional areas. So you're working with a different project manager or a different graphics designer, or a different medical writer as well, across each of your projects, which can be interesting at times, but for the most part, it really gives you that diversity and allows you to kind of experience everybody at your company. This is probably an understatement, but the thing you get out of grad school is that you become an expert in a super niche topic. I did my PhD was in like the evolution, like the genetic evolution of like bacterial virulence. How many people care? Probably a lot of you guys, but outside of that, how many people care? And I love it, and it was awesome. It was fascinating. Who knew there was that much to know about bacterial virulence? However, after like 5.5 years of that, I was like, hey, cool, I get it. Salmonella, they're badasses. Yeah, I get it. In medcoms, I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly becoming an expert in something. Like I said, right now I'm working on like 3 different diseases, 4 different drugs. So I'm constantly I'm constantly learning, okay, cool. What is the mechanism of action of this drug? How does it work in this disease? And how is it different from that disease? Right. But that's just scratching the surface. Like I've chosen to kind of segment myself into just 3 diseases, but you could, there's a breadth of disease areas that you can work on. So, and then when you're bored, it's like, hey, cool, I'm done with diabetes. I want to move on to something else. And then you start all over and you learn about that as well. So you're constantly evolving. And so the learning never stops. And I find that really rewarding as well. Okay, so like having talked about why I think a career is rewarding, I wanted to, so something that I think is really hard when you're not in the field is to go like, okay, well, you've talked about all of this stuff, but agencies, like there's a lot of them. So how do you choose the right one? And how do you know that an agency fit is the right fit for you, right? So I wanted to kind of share my N of 1 personal experiences about why I chose 6 degrees medical, but also why I've stayed at 6 degrees medical, to maybe help you decide if an agency like 6 degrees could work for you. COVID made us all kind of go remote, but the cool thing about 6 degrees was they were kind of hybrid before COVID, so they were ahead of the curve. I now live in Ottawa, so I'm fully remote. I never go into the office, but also we have an office in downtown Toronto. So if anyone's like, yeah, I want the city life, you have an office. I get to travel. Obviously, the first year, not so good for that. But since 2021, I've been to Copenhagen, London, not London, Ontario. I'm going to Hamburg later this year, New Orleans, DC, and Florida. That one was okay. So it's cool because we do a lot of events. So there's a lot of travel. I mentioned the diversity in disease areas, but also I think I made clear that we have a diversity of service offerings. So some agencies, all they do is publications. So all they're doing is writing manuscripts. I never wanted to write another manuscript after grad school, and I haven't yet. Yay. So I really like the diversity in what I'm doing. So it's not like every day is not the same. We have a really strong, flexible work program. Coming out of grad school where you choose your own hours all of the time. One thing that was really jarring about working in an agency is all of your time needs to be reported. And I was like, I don't know how I spend my time. This is stressful. But the cool thing is we can choose when we want to spend our time. So it's the middle of the day and here I am giving a talk because I'm just going to make up these hours later. I have not worked a Friday till 5 p.m. since like 2021, just because I choose to work longer hours the rest of the week and, stop work at like 2 p.m. on Fridays. So it really is like the time is your own. Sometimes that does mean that you're up at 4 a.m. for a meeting if you have a European client. But sometimes that also means like you can get ahead of long weekend traffic. So for someone that came from grad school where you got to choose that and no one really regulated it, it was awesome coming here and finding that that was still true. I had never really thought about corporate culture while in school because, your culture is your lab's culture, right? And that kind of evolves. But 6 Degrees has core values, and once I did hear about them, they all kind of resonated with me. So having fun is a core value. Anyone that's in this audience that knows me knows that that's true about me. You know, I've mentioned the teamwork, and being part of a team is a really important part about 6 Degrees. Being adaptable, constantly learning, taking ownership, openly communicating, and being bold with ideas. All of these 7 core values, once I heard them, I was like, hey, yeah, like check across the board. So, if you're thinking about making the transition, I think, asking yourself, well, what does matter to me? Or what aspects of like the culture from grad school do I want to carry forward? Can really help you find the right fit as well. We do a fair bit of outreach and engagement. This picture was from a shoebox project that we did around the holidays to kind of put together little shoeboxes, and they were given to people less fortunate during the holidays. This week I'm headed to Montreal for like our summer party, which should be fun. And so yeah, like despite being fully remote, like we do find opportunities to engage with each other, and engage with with the community around us, which I think is really important. And then this one is a little interesting. So when I first looked at the 6 Degrees website, the thing that stood out to me was the entire executive team. So the CEO/owner, all our VPs, they are all women. And I was like, hey, that's cool. Um, you know, I think academia it's changing, obviously, but academia can be a bit of a male dominated field. So it was really cool to think about working for a group of women, particularly ones that have a stake in the company. So like I mentioned, our CEO owns the company. Um, and then like also thinking about the fact that we're medium sized. So a lot of medical communications agencies, especially if you look at ones in the US, there are huge like nesting pots of like there's like smaller agencies that like fit within a larger agency, and that can be awesome because it means that you've got a lot of skills to lean on. You've got a lot of experiences to learn from. But coming out of like an environment where my lab was my company, so that was like what, 9 people and my PI, the thought of moving into being one number amidst like 300 people was a little daunting. So we are a 60-person organization. I feel like my voice is heard, and yet we have enough people to go around that we're not like constantly overworked. So it's a really good balance. And I have, just if anyone's interested, thrown in a QR code there for our careers page if anyone wants to look at it. But we do take referrals as well, and I will strongly encourage, if any of what I've said today is of interest to you, please do reach out over Twitter or LinkedIn, or email, and I'd be happy to chat more. So with that, I've talked about hopefully communicated the what, how, and why of how I got here. But I wanted to let you know that like this isn't it, right? So when I think about like my future, I see a promising, ongoing trajectory, which is good because I don't want to have to like refigure out what I'm doing with my life in another 3 years. So for me, having now been a principal medical writer, I can look to transition into a management position where I'd be responsible um, for direct reports and the performance of medical writers on the team. I could transition to pharma. There's a lot of positions that value scientific degrees um, across various departments, or I could move into an adjacent industry. So other medical writing organizations, like I mentioned, the government or journals, or more focused or niche organizations. So like I mentioned, we're kind of an organization that does all of medcoms, but there are ones that only do marketing or only do publications or only do advisory boards. So the options are still open to me. So there's still a road to go down, which is great. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and see if there are any questions.
That was fantastic, Bushra. So again, if you have questions, you're welcome to type them into the chat. You can also message them to me if you didn't want to put them into the to everyone, or you can use the raise hand function, and we can let you unmute and ask your question if that's easier. So while everyone thinks about this, I was going to ask about the job training. So you mentioned in your talk that you took a few courses. So I was curious if those were done in-house. So is it your business that has their own courses, or do they let you just kind of take whatever you find and think would be useful?
That's a great question. So it was a mix of both. We have a learning fund. So if you find something on your own that you think will, works towards your personal or professional development goals, and you make the case for it, you can sign up for it and kind of do that on your own, and they'll compensate it depending on how much it is. So I know some people have done like Toastmasters, for example, to improve their public speaking, and so that's an option. But so the leadership course and the business foundations, those were both offered by the company once you got to a certain level, just because I think there's a recognition that very few people get proper official training on leadership, and then all of a sudden you're in this position where you're in charge of other people's personal development. So I think that was like a good signal from them to think about, right, we need to provide training. So they organize like external consultants to deliver training on that.
Okay, awesome. We have some questions in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a really good question from Kate. How do you think AI is going to change medical science writing and communication?
That is super great. I think there's a space to use AI as another tool, right? Like it's going to be a tool in the toolkit. It's not going to replace medical writing just by virtue of the fact that someone still needs to fact check. So I think the sooner the entire industry figures out how to adopt it as a tool, the better and probably safer it'll be for everyone involved, because the risk of misinformation is pretty high with AI. And I can tell you, I mean, it's very variable right now, like in terms of adoption. But it's certainly something that everyone is talking about, as I'm sure they are across all industries.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
We have another question about how you find your writing style has changed. So if you think about from grad school to your job now, Have you noticed that your style of writing has changed?
I think so. So I think we tend to be, I mean, for lack of a better word, academic, right? Or more more confined um to like the a very standard structure, like story structure. And I find now like there's so many different ways to tell a story. And the funnest part is sitting at the start and thinking, how do I want to tell this story, right? Like what is my narrative? I will say also, the amount of long form writing I do has gone way down. It's despite the title having writer in its name, there's actually very little, depending on the project you're working on, very little long form writing. So I'm not writing like abstracts and manuscripts all of the time. I'm writing like information on a slide, right? Which most of that is actually in the speaker notes. So no one's actually reading what I'm writing. So it really becomes about like how to build the narrative versus actually like fully writing it out. But Mer, I will say it does spark more joy.
That's good to hear. Okay, we have some more questions. This is great. How does your role differ from entry-level positions at consulting firms? I know many of these are research-based for writing materials. Just wondering if you considered this or have any insight.
That's a great question. I think consulting is a pretty broad umbrella. Like we call ourselves consultants. So it really depends on the type of service offerings. So whereas we are focused on medical education, so we do a lot of external facing assets. Like a lot of consulting firms might do content development for internal use. So for internal use by the client. So again, it just really depends on the type of deliverable, and then the format basically. So I would say, in terms of skill sets, it's probably very similar. Um, I'm less familiar, but I also don't know if consulting firms are as client facing as we are. So from day three, I want to say I've been like emailing and liaising with clients, whereas in consulting it might be a little bit different.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions in here.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering how you found transitioning to reading and writing about medical areas that are presumably very different from microbiome and your PhD training. Um, so I guess just how was that transition?
Yeah, yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I haven't worked on a single project that has mentioned the microbiome once. It's very disappointing. But I think what's important to keep in mind is like we chose our like theses, or the focus of our PhDs just out of something that interested us, right? And I think science in general is just interesting. So you can find that like that interest in whatever disease or therapeutic area you're working on. And then the process is pretty much the same. You spend a couple of days trawling through PubMed, reading all the review papers, and you're like, cool, instantly I'm an expert. Um, the cool thing is like, we know how to learn. And so you're constantly just expected to show up being an expert. But you know how to do that because you've done it before. So, um, you know, it's, it is a transition, for sure. Like some people ask me now, like, oh, did you do your PhD in like this liver disease? I was like, hell no. I eukaryotes, no. Like, what is an organelle? Um, but you just you read all of the review papers, and then you pick up the language, right? So it takes time, but to me it was worth it.
As there's a sort of a follow-up on that idea
Yeah,
here, how would you say a basic science PhD helped you prepare for more clinically focused writing?
that's a great question. I think the steepest learning curve was like just understanding pharma, like just understanding where things like fit within the industry, right? Like, okay, I can write about like, diabetes generally. What I found hard is like, what is the purpose of like, how is this asset or deliverable going to be used? And what is the end goal for my client? That was something that I certainly didn't know going into the role. And it was something I had to learn on the job. I think, you know, if there's one thing I could recommend, it's like just getting a better understanding of how pharma functions, like, beyond like, yep, there's phase two, phase three, and then they launch, right? Like knowing the industry a bit more definitely helps. But like the cool thing is like, um, any medcoms you join, like there are people from all walks of life and often people who have been in pharma previously. And so you do get a lot of that training on the job. And then there are a lot of resources that you can look to for further information. But yeah, that was the weirdest. I was like, I don't know how drug development happens at all. But at the same time, publishing a manuscript is publishing a manuscript wherever you go. Going to a conference is going to a conference. So there are things that are similar, and there are some things where you're like, whoa, I did not know this much money was put into this. Cool. But it's eye-opening, and it's part of like the learning experience, I think.
So you still get that joy of learning new things every day,
Oh
but
God, yeah, yeah.
you don't have to
I
do mini preps.
No, so amazing.
I'm going to circle back around to the second part of Victoria's question. She's asking about the graphic design aspect of the job and how that works. And I had the similar idea because I noticed how beautiful your slides were.
I can't take credit. So, um, it's a mix. So the question about having collaborators, yes, 100%. So, most agencies, including ours, have an in-house design team. So we have people who are basically like PowerPoint experts. So when I was in grad school, like obviously everything was on PowerPoint, but I had no idea like of like the things you could do with PowerPoint like until I got here. So they do like I did get training on like how to use PowerPoint better, which was awesome. But we do have the ability to lean on our creative team to really bring things to life. So like for me, day to day, it depends, whether I choose to do something myself or choose to hand it off. Really depends on a couple of factors. Like one, how creative am I feeling? Sometimes the answer is not at all. Um, and sometimes the answer is like, yeah, I feel like playing around with this because, you know, thinking about what something will look like will help me build that narrative, right? Because sometimes those are very hand in hand. And then beyond that, it's kind of like, well, how much time do I want to put into this, or how much do I care about learning this? And certainly early on, I was like, I want to do it all myself because I want to learn all of this. So and there's flexibility and freedom to do that, which was great. So I will say like my own skills have improved, but then there are times where I'm like, I know I can do this, but it would be so much faster to have like our designer do it. And so definitely these slides, I was like, here's a bunch of words on boxes. Have fun.
That's
And here
great
we
though.
are.
It also, it's, time management.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, we have another question about if you're comfortable talking about it, what a reasonable salary expectation would be for starting, and how quickly does that scale up?
That's a good question. I think it depends. Like, so an agency based in Canada, a small independently owned agency, your starting salary is not going to be comparable to a larger agency based out of the US. I will say a lot of US agencies are looking for Canadians, one, because we're cheaper, two, because like it's fully remote anyway. So why do they care? But because of the dollar conversion, you're for us, it's bigger bang for the buck, right? So I don't know what I know what I started at. I think the field has shifted a little bit because it definitely had a bit of explosion during COVID, but I would say you're starting in the 60s. But how quickly that scales really depends on you, and how quickly your career path progresses. So I would say, if we're talking about bands, like salary bands, like you're probably looking at 60 to 70 for like a writer, and then 75 to like 90 for a senior, and then it goes up from there. um Typically, being promoted from like a medical writer to senior medical writer is like the year and a half timeline, and then from there it might be like 2 years. I had a bit of an acceleration just because COVID was like trial by fire, and there was a lot of change happening in the industry. Um, so like I wouldn't say you know, I would say like that the more standard is like a year and a half, and then another year and a half to 2 years to the next level after that.
What does the job interview look like for this?
Oh, that's a great question. Also something I was like not ready, like not expecting, I guess. So it starts off pretty normal. If you're looking for a medical writer position, you're probably being interviewed by a couple of directors who are kind of the people that will manage you, to just kind of understand your background, like why you're interested, the soft interview stuff. After that, there's typically a writing test. So this, well, at least when I did it, it was a time, like I had 8 hours to kind of do the test and then submit it. Different agencies do it differently. I've seen places where it's like you have a week and just let us know how long you took. Some are more tight on time. They're like, here's a 2 hour slot, and here's what you need to do. But typically, there's some form of writing test that involves something along the lines of like, read this paper and write a 1 page document about it, right? Write a synopsis, or read this paper and create 3 slides that explain what the paper tells you, or something along those lines, to kind of get at how well you distill information and how well you communicate information. My test also had a bit of a creative component. So going back to Victoria's question, they do expect you to be able to have like a small level of creativity, just to be able to communicate ideas visually, right? So they literally gave me a couple of ugly slides, and they were like, how would you make this better, or how would you make this clearer, right? So okay, like, why are we using like blue for something that's like bad, maybe we should use red, like things like that. So just really simple visual changes to communicate messaging more effectively. So there was that as well, but I don't know if that's standard for most writing tests. And then once you do the writing test, it's really to sense, to gauge whether you get it or don't. And then after that, I had a follow-up interview that was more like HR focused. And yeah, so yeah, I think the writing test is like the interesting part. And I can tell you, like all agencies will require them, and then they'll all require them like regardless of level. So it's not just like for entry medical writers. Like I've applied for jobs for like assistant director, and it's like, here's a writing test. I'm like, no. um,
So you don't end, just because you've graduated from university doesn't mean the tests are
no, the
over.
tests don't end.
Well, I think we're out of time. This has been really great. If everybody can join me in a virtual round of applause for Dr. Bushra Ilyas. Thank you so much for joining us. Our next seminar is in 2 weeks on August 15th, when we have Dr. Celeste Stewart coming. And she works more along the lines of patient advocacy, but she's also an alumni from McMaster University. So I hope everybody will join us for that one as well. Thank you again, Bushra.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.